Welcome to Janice. Today we're going to be talking about purpose. We're going to talk about impact, advocacy, resilience, all the things you've shown in all of your brilliant roles and work. And let's start with this. So you've been pioneering all things access for people who are deaf, of hard of hearing, since 2002. As I said, you've achieved incredible things, driven initially by the experience of your daughter. And I was curious, going right back to the beginning, if you like, how did you work out where to start in terms of making a change that would not only benefit your daughter, but other people?
There was no process. It was based on my daughter coming home one day and saying that she couldn't go to religious school because she couldn't hear. And I said, nice try. Kids all over the world, no matter what religion, have been trying to get out of religious school, and you're not going to, we can fix this, right? Like, good, that was a good try. So I went to the person who was the head, in our case, a rabbi, who went to speak to him. And he said, well, what do you need? And I explained what my daughter needed. And he said, done. And there was this, and by the way, he happened to be Rabbi Posner, one of these truly great men who really became a rabbi for all the right reasons. And, you know, one of those rare people you don't meet, you know, sometimes just generally, you know, notwithstanding religion. He's just a great man. Yes. And I thought, my God, that is so, you know, easy to fix. And I realized that I thought for the men, you know, perhaps this is about education. And if I just educate people,
yes,
then I could solve the problem. Now, it's not just about education, and I quickly found out. But initially, I started working on problems that impacted our family. So it was selfish. It was like, okay, I need to solve religious goal. Then I decided to start working on theaters, because we lived in New York City, and then I moved around projects that impacted us. But there was a certain tipping point where I realized, okay, some of the projects are not going to be as simple. In fact, most. And some of them, like the taxis, took 9 years. So I realized that I had to think longer life cycle in terms of not what my daughter needed at that precise moment, but if you add 9 years to her life, what will she need? And so I started working on long range problems like transportation.
So when you when you went outside the family, if you like, and looked at those bigger, you know, goals and bigger issues, how far ahead did you look in terms of setting yourself a big goal? I know you said it's a long-term process, but did you say, right, I want to help X number of people in these? How deliberate was your strategy versus being emergent, as it was for your family? I'm curious how emergent or deliberate it was for, if you like, the professional side of you.
It wasn't initially. It was really selfish. It was about, how do we get our family to function? We live in New York City. You can't live in a cultural capital and not partake in culture, at least to me, right? Maybe for some people they can, but not for me. That's why I live in New York City. I wanted to be able to go to the museums, the theaters, and suddenly we couldn't. And there's only so many times you can go to a circus where sound doesn't matter. And I don't think I've been to the circus since, and I'm not sure I ever will, because we went to so many circuses. I think I maxed out lifelong of circuses. And there became a point where, you know, we were just doing this to function as a family. But once I started getting, I would say, a certain amount of successes in museums and theaters, and there was almost like a baseline, I realized I had to look at bigger projects. I had to move beyond our family, because what's really interesting with the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's about the individual. But if you go to a place and you say it's about your child, well, they're not going to just do and implement this expensive thing for just your child. It doesn't matter what the ADA says.
Sure,
they want bigger groups of audience. And it doesn't really matter what the law is. And you're going to spend your entire life suing, and that's not, even though I'm trained as an attorney, that's not how I expect to live my life, going around suing people. So I realized I had to work on big projects that impacted lots of people. And there was just kind of this tipping point where I realized, like, okay, the taxis, the subways, how is my daughter going to get around? How is she going to function? Once I started thinking about her as like a teenager adult, and I would say it was around 6 years old when suddenly she started looking more like a little person than a baby, that I started thinking longer term. And at that point, I started working on the bigger projects. And then there was another tipping point where I think it was after I started testifying in Congress before the Subcommittee on National Parks, and I was appointed to the FCC's Consumer Advisory Committee. I started seeing this as much bigger than my family, because suddenly, like, I was thrust into this government arena where before I'm just trying to figure out how my daughter can hear Peter and the Wolf at Lincoln Center, and suddenly I went from that to I'm on the government stage and I have to work, and there's a lot of people relying on me. And there was that point where I realized a lot of people needed me to do this and get it right, because they didn't either have the gumption to do what I was doing, the skills, I don't know what it is, but they were not doing what I was doing. And I had a responsibility to fix this for people who couldn't do it. And that's just kind of how I function.
It's fascinating how, actually a huge amount of your work was all based around the family. It wasn't just initially. Again, it was, the museums, the taxis, the parks and so on. And then obviously it spread beyond that. Out of all the achievements you've had, which one are you particularly most proud of?
That's like asking me which is my favorite child. And while my children think I have a favorite child, I don't. But I think I have two. One would be the obvious of just recently disrupting the hearing aid, the new proposed over-the-counter hearing aid regulation. And the reason I love that is it's going to drive down the price of hearing aids, and it's going to have a global effect. The FDA, for all its craziness right now with COVID, removing that issue, it has a profound impact on the world. And when the FDA requires testing of hearing aids and eventually generic names for features, the ripple effect around the world will be heard, pun intended. And that will drive down the price. So I know one thing we're going to get to is my travels. But when I travel around the world and I see people who are learning sign language because they have no choice and they can't afford hearing aids. And there is no issue, and I have no issue with anyone learning sign language, but it should be their family's choice and their own personal choice, not because they can't afford hearing aids. That is troubling for me. And the fact that they will soon be able to get hearing aids, for me to have this global impact, and the fact that everyone told me I couldn't do it, it is personally satisfying. So that's my really big one. But on a personal level, on a different warm and fuzzy level, literally asking Build-A-Bear Workshop and Maxine Clark to add hearing aids to its product line, and having Build-A-Bear Workshop become the first toy, a mainstream toy to have hearing aids, which then now Mattel offers it for Barbie. That was personally satisfying, because there was nothing better than seeing a kid who has something that reflects them or their grandparent or someone and makes them happy. That's just the best. And it was just, the hearing aid was just added to the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York, which, in my wildest dreams, I never thought anything I worked on would be in a museum. So that I just love. But I just love the fact that it makes kids happy.
Yeah, that's brilliant. They're both brilliant examples. You talked earlier, Janice, about skills and gumption and so on, in terms of the responsibility you felt when you were in the, I'll probably get the wrong term given I'm not an American, but in a congressional or the government hearings. I want to dive into your method now. And some of this may be in hindsight as opposed to working out, but you've been in front of big name politicians, businessmen and women, and increasingly high stakes for others, as you said. And you've just given us a glimpse in terms of when somebody said you can't do it. That probably gets your goat and you go for it. But take us through your method. How do you go about convincing somebody or some organization to change?
I look for the human connection. So I have to find a hook or something that resonates with that person. Sometimes I know it and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get lucky. A lot of times it's throw enough stuff against the wall and something sticks. And right, like you just have no idea what's going to happen. And I wish I could say I was able to tell when it was going to work and when it's not. But every so often you read an article. So, people always tell about reading books and there's like a kind of a standard format of like, for executive coaches, what you should do. I followed none of that. I actually read magazines, and it's not that I don't read books, but I looked for, and you're going to think this is the funniest thing, but I read sometimes Town and Country magazine in the United States, which is considered a very, not a typical magazine, but the magazine in that case always did profiles of big donors at museums.
Right.
In those profiles, I learned what their background is, what their connection is. And in one case, for example, right, it's not the typical route. And in one case, I read an article about Bob Wright, the former CEO of NBC. And I learned he started Autism Speaks because of his grandson. Well, I had been having an issue with one of NBC's programs. Now I had, quote, a hook. I had a human way to relate to him. And that's how I was able to contact NBC, but contact Bob Wright. And his assistant helped because she got it, right? They got it. They understood why caption standards were critical, why spelling mattered for a child with hearing loss was learning. Yeah. So I find by reading not your traditional guru things, but magazine profiles, short, sweet, to the point, right? I don't have time to read a book on every person I'm meeting. I need an article. Vanity Fair is another great magazine that I use for great profile pieces. Atlantic is another one.
That's brilliant. So you found that, you've throwing stuff at a wall or finding that connection, but you found a connection, you got their attention. What's next? What comes next?
Well, I do a lot of the work. So Stephen Simon, who's the head of disabilities for the city of Los Angeles, he said, you make it really easy, right? You do the work, right? I need something. Right. You give me the white paper explaining it. When the National Park Service was writing guidelines, I handed them the guidelines I already wrote from my section, for the hearing access section, right? It didn't fit their format and they needed to change it, and adapt it. But they had the basis, right? You don't know what a company or organization's format is. But I gave them the bulk of it, and it was easy for them. When people didn't understand website, like how to change their website, I would literally print out the page, circle, literally glue, with a glue stick, the symbol onto the thing, or now cut and paste. This is going back years ago before everything is so sophisticated with, before you could just screenshot everything and, cut and paste and move everything. But in the old days, so to speak, I used to literally print it out and with a glue stick, glue the symbols on a piece of paper and send it to them and say, here it, fax it actually, here it is.
So you made it really easy. You make it easy for them.
Complete turnkey. I made everything.
And how did you get permission to do? How did you get permission to do that work? I mean, does some just say, "Hey, go off and do it and show me what you can do"? Are others more difficult? But you have to have permission, right, to actually go off and do.
I just did it, right? No. Right. So if I send someone, here's a white paper and okay, here's the issue. So here's a perfect example. I haven't accomplished it yet, but I found out that in the Americans with Disabilities Act, the problem with the ADA is there are no procurement codes that match the access that needs to be implemented, which is crazy. And so I wrote a white paper on this and gave examples. And so I sent that to the president, right? Who says I have to have permission? Remember, I'm American. We just,
Well, Brits stay the same. I was partly just as an opening question to see whether you'd take that one, but you clearly didn't.
I'm an American, but I just did it. I didn't ask permission, and I think that's the thing. I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm taking, right?
No,
I'm
no.
taking, I'm taking the initiative to do what they need and make it easy for them. And so if I make it easy for them, right, their plate's busy. They don't want to do this. I'm not saying everybody.
So
I just
imagine,
do it.
so you've made it easy. You put something out. You haven't asked permission, of course not. You put it in front of them, and then the next stage. I guess in some cases there'll be some processes they'll have to go through, some decisions they have to make. But how do you sustain their attention? Because you've had a big fanfare at the beginning, you've got that human connection, you've put something in front of them, fantastic. But they have other priorities. They get busy, distracted. How do you sustain
Well, I
it?
maintain it on my calendar. I periodically email them. It depends. If this is somebody who I can tell is going to do it versus someone who's not, there's two different paths, right? There's the person who doesn't want to do this and the person who does. So let's start with the easy person. The person who does, they're moving it along. They're responding to me. Maybe they forget. I'll send them a just want to touch base if there's any updates. And they'll respond. We're working. They'll give me an update. That's easy. That's normal. And sometimes it's a long process, right? I'm working with an organization to update language for media. And that's a long process, but they're moving it along. Now, let's take the more difficult, challenging one. They don't want to do it. Well, I can pretty much tell from their attitude, they're slow to react. So
Yes.
I take a different position. Remember, I'm an advocate in this, so not as a consultant, which is a very different position. As an advocate, I start numbering my subject line of how many emails I've sent to them. So I will write, any updates. And at some point where they're not responding, you'll see second, third, fourth. Nobody wants their boss to get an email that you sent 100 and something emails to them, right? And I will number to whatever number. Then the other thing I do is I maintain a what I call a phone log. It's not really a phone log, but I write down all of the emails, the phone conversations, maybe not the emails, but the phone conversations, anything pithy, and I will send that to someone if I'm not getting a response. So years ago,
That's incredibly methodical.
yes. Well, I have a horrible memory, so it's the only way I can keep track of everything. But years ago, I sent a 17-page phone log to the Secretary of Interior and said, what more can I do to get Ellis Island more accessible? And that's how I received a phone call.
That's a great
right?
question.
Like, what more? I had done meetings, sent emails, and I had the date, who I spoke to, their contact, their title, and a summary, especially if they said something offensive. And I kept track of all of that. And I sent it. And I'm like, what more can I do as a mother to make the park accessible for my daughter for her school trip? And is there a mother anywhere in the world who has done more? So I then received a phone call from John Jarvis, who then eventually became the director of the national parks, asking me to meet with him and then write guidelines, which I did. The first federal guidelines to define effective communication. But then again, I wrote my section, and then the person also copied some of it, but put it into their format. But that helps document what I've done. It also shows I'm keeping track.
Yeah, it shows incredible commitment, and effectively, it will propel anybody saying, "Hey, this person's done a hell of a lot." I mean, I don't want to be the person who, because I guess at some point, I don't know if you've done this, they may have in their mind there's a risk of PR, negative PR. You go to the papers, you go somewhere where somebody says, "Hey, I've spent months and months, emails after email. What about transparency and engagement with the public and citizens like yourself?" Does that play a role?
It's
PR?
PR. It's Department of Justice. It's a myriad of places I could go, but I'm keeping track, and it sends a very strong community. I don't think they even think about, oh, she's worked hard. I think they think, oh my God, I better cover my butt, because this woman has
Right. So it's more that.
Yeah, this woman is keeping track. She has very clear notes, and I'm really good at paper trailing, and that's what they're afraid of.
So who in along the different journeys you've been on, what one person, whether you name the person or not, what one person has inspired you the most? I don't mean necessarily the person who signed off on the changes to the guidelines or to whatever it is, but perhaps another advocate or somebody else. Is there one person who's really been a catalyst in your own learning and your own development along the journeys?
I wouldn't say one person. I have a group of people for different things. So I have my board of advisors, one you've interviewed, Ruth Gauthier, who she pushes me, right, in that positive way of doing more than I think I can do. And we have another mutual friend, Debbie Heiser, the same. They push me further than I think. So Ruth encouraged me to apply to Harvard, and I now go in the Kennedy School. I mean, where I thought I couldn't do that. But then I have other people like Arlene Romoff, and Nancy Kingsley, who gave me the history of hearing advocacy so I could stand on their shoulders, right? Rather than reinventing the wheel.
Right.
That's invaluable. But then along the way, I have met people that have taught me, like John Jarvis, so now I'm, approaching, he and Don Murphy, another person at the National Parks, who, in a sense, mentored me along the way, teaching me skills that I didn't know I was missing, and encouraged me what to do and taught me a tremendous amount. And I've met other people like that, so I was taking, when I met John, I wasn't adversarial with him, but I'm in a sort of an adversarial position, right? I want the parks to do something,
Yes.
And people may have not wanted to do it. But you meet sometimes incredible people. Howard Roberts, who was at the head of the New York City Transit Authority, he taught me so much. I learned so much from so many in little bits and chunks. I was just on with somebody recently from the Department of Transportation who just taught me something. And I thought, that's freaking brilliant. Like, that is just unbelievably brilliant.
But you're receptive, so they're teaching you, but you're receptive to it. I mean, all of this requires a huge amount of effort, determination on your part, and obviously it's personal to you. But even though it's personal, I mean, it takes a lot. How do you sustain yourself? What do you do to sustain yourself with the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs of the nature of this role in this campaign you're leading?
Well, one, I love what I do. Sometimes you find your path and you don't even know it's your path, right? I didn't go into this thinking this was my path. I went to function. But I did go to law school to change the world. And bizarrely, here I am, in some weird circumventing way. But I do, but you know how the GDP has something called a basket full of products? Right? To figure out where the economy is going, you have a basket, you look at flour, you look at a bunch of different things. I have a basket full of projects. So I have lots of projects going on at the time because, for example, the taxi project took 9 years. Amtrak took, I don't even know how many years. I have the Smithsonian, I think I'm up to 15 years. If I sat and waited for each of those projects, it's kind of like watching a pot boil water, right? You would pull your hair out. But when you have a lot of projects and you sometimes have to sit and wait for people to leave office, maybe die, whatever it takes.
Well, that's a really, really long-term perspective then. But the point is, you have their different stages. Some are going really well, some will be more challenging. And the point is, you're diversifying, and that diversification gives you energy at different points, right? As opposed to saying banking on one or having to wait or getting stuck into the weeds, as some people do. Some people get very focused on one thing, one project, one initiative. Yet you're diversifying and keeping things, I guess, stimulating for you as well.
But not only that, I'm keeping the successes going. So, for example, like the FDA project, I started that in, I think, 2009. Here it is, 2022, right? That's a really long time, 23 years. If I'm doing no, how many years is that? 13 years. Right? And that's a long time to sit and wait. But if you have a lot of other projects keeping you going, and then now that project has hit, right? I get a success from that. While the other ones may be stagnating, So it looks like, oh, where did this come from? I've been working on that for 13 years, right? People may not know about it for 13 years, but so I always have a stream of successes. Sometimes they bunch up, like a pipeline. And sometimes there could be a dry spell. But there's always a stream of successes because you work on so many different things. And the type of work I do,
Yes.
I'm also not doing all the work. I need, like, for example, the FDA to go do their thing. I bring the problem,
Yeah,
and
sure.
and then I'm going to a
Yeah.
senator, and they're doing their thing, and I'm just initiating it. I'm not actually doing the project. But by moving so many projects, I just keep a pipeline of successes coming. And it sustains
brilliant.
me.
I love that. So there's doing something you love, keeping that pipeline and that portfolio fresh and moving on and having a pipeline of successes. What else? What do you do practically to sustain yourself
I just,
rather than burning
no,
out?
I just keep it moving and doing new, fresh things. And, when people write me letters telling the impact it has on them, that's huge, right? It doesn't even take many letters, but it makes a huge difference. But I'm always doing new things. So like now I'm going to be working on a TEDx talk. I'm going to be teaching a class on how
Fantastic.
to affect change, right? So I'm always being challenged. I'm always working on new projects. So I'm always being challenged myself, right? Like I'm going to Harvard. I'm always stimulated by the new challenges, which keeps you fresh.
This sounds like and feels more than work, however you define work. In what you described, is this all consuming? Is this a 7 days a week full on endeavor? Do you take breaks?
My life is mush, for lack of a description. It's all encompassing. That is a problem, but it's also, I love what I do. So even when I travel, I'm working because I'm tracking global best practices around the world. So there is no boundaries in terms of my work, fun profession. I'm going with my daughters. That's positive and negative. But I can't explain. I love what I do. Like, I get a high from doing it. And so it's not a problem because I'm really happy doing this. I love it.
That's fantastic. You mentioned travel there. What does travel give you? What does it do to you? How does it make you feel?
It's
what
my oxygen.
Experiences does
It is
give you?
absolutely my oxygen. So when I do get burnt out, travel, even if it's local, is my oxygen. And so sometimes I can't leave the country. So I will do a walking tour, explore a new neighborhood in my, in New York City is a big area. So I'll go to another neighborhood. I do walking tours like this Saturday. I'm going to do a walking tour with a friend. Go to a new restaurant and maybe we'll do like an eating tour. Like my daughter and I once did, when she came in, we went to 5 different ice cream places to compare to see which of the newest artisanal ice cream places were the best, right? And we'll get one cone and we'll share it and we'll compare. That for me is absolutely stimulating, clears my head in like a nanosecond.
So where beyond your home city, where are you most looking forward to visit in the coming few months at the time of this recording?
I love going everywhere, like literally everywhere. I can't think, I've had bad experiences, but I've never visited a bad country. Because to me, the politics and the people are separate. And I don't get involved in the politics when I visit countries. So I want to visit every country in the world. So I don't do them in a specific order. I do them basically where I can get the best deal, where there's an opportunity, it's safe. Let's say a place is quiet, versus an uproar, because you never know when the next uproar will happen. When there's a group that's going. So I seize opportunities along the way. I can't tell you where I'm going next because it's a little dicey. I can tell you off record, it's a little dicey where I'm going, so I don't want it to be public, but I am super excited.
I love your energy and drive. You have a vitality to you, which is absolutely fascinating. And you've overcome a lot in your life. You've written publicly about the challenges in some of your personal life in terms of, domestic violence and divorce. And it was very moving and difficult to read. I can't imagine what that was like for you. You have to obviously protect yourself and your family and fight the system. As I think you used the term non-moneyed spouse. I think that's the term you used. What did you learn from that experience, and what importantly needs to change in the system?
It's still ongoing, and what I learned is that the system is corrupt. So in the United States, we like to pretend that corruption occurs in other countries, but we have a very corrupt system within both parties, and both parties are doing nefarious things, and it needs to change. And we can clean it up, and it's time. We have made fun of, like the way we made fun of in Hollywood of the casting couch until Weinstein. And suddenly then we took a deeper look at that the casting couch is not acceptable. The same when we make fun of lawyers being sharks and calling them the matrimonial mafia. Those are not funny terms. They impact real human beings. And it's not that simple. And what I learned is I am really good at solving complex problems, but when I can't, it's usually and always involves corruption. And I've even found corruption within the hearing access world and in government, and every single time that, there was one time at a museum, the person blocked my email. It turned out he got indicted for embezzlement. Another time somebody was throwing business to their college roommate, and that was the roadblock. People don't like when you mess with their ill-gotten gains, right? They get really not nice. So to change the systems within the courts, it's actually not that complex. One, we have something in the state of New York called e-file, but yet not everything is e-filed. You have certain things that are still paper, and we need to move everything online because it makes it up where people's can't get involved. So as an example, you have to subpoena the lower court, to move the file from the lower court to the upper court for an appeal, you have to get permission from a judge, right? And you got to get a paper form. Why are we still using paper? Forget about the climate change issues. That makes bad people, right? Somebody is making a decision. And it turned out, in that case, that particular judge was on the grievance committee with the person I was filing a complaint and appealing, right? And so that's problematic. So putting everything online eliminates that human element, which, the assignment of judges, the transferring of files, right? All of that should be online. Second, put videos in the camera. I had a situation where transcript information went missing from transcripts. Well, can't do that when there's a video, right? Judges don't want video, private matters. Well, it's not really private because it's an open public courtroom. But right now, when we're all online because of COVID, we have these very isolated little Zoom rooms that make for nefarious things happening. And we need to have where everything is recorded so we literally can do like they do in sports, go to the tape.
Yes.
Finally, online notaries. It is ridiculous in this day and age to not have that online because it makes people that don't have access to notaries in their office, like lawyers, but people of lower economic status, to not have access, and it becomes a project of going to a bank. Banks are eliminating notaries because it's a time suck for their employees where they make no money. So we're eliminating notaries at banks, making it harder for people to get notaries. Why can't we just have somebody at the court, the way you file papers, now switch them over to notaries? It shouldn't be that public. Hold up, if we can, or forget even that, upload your driver's license. If we can upload our driver's license to renew our driver's license, why can't we upload our driver's license with our signature for our legal documents? It's time to clean up these antiquated things. All documents should be online. If a judge can't read something online, and because they're too, antiquated and back, from a different era, then it's time for them to retire. Because it's time, you got to move forward.
Well
We don't
said.
let anybody else just
Well
like,
said.
hold back systems. It's get with the program.
I mean, you're applying the same, in some ways, to me at least, the same principles of access and reducing obstacles, frictions that get in the way. You just described some of those, and obviously changing the system where you can. It's just sad that you had to go through it and are still going through it. I mean, as we draw to a close, Janice, I mean, think about other advocates, people on other topics and causes who are perhaps earlier in their career, in their life. What one or two nuggets of advice would you give them as they try and deliver their own impact in their own way and learn from you?
Show up and follow up. If you don't show up
Brilliant.
and you don't follow up, you accomplish nothing. You start with a no, and it can only turn into a yes. And then you got to follow up. So if someone tells you to do something, follow up. If they don't answer your phone call, it could, Vernon Jordan, the esteemed civil rights leader before he passed, I wanted a meeting with him. And he said to me, he only took a meeting because I called 4 times. And he said, if it wasn't worth my time to call him, it wasn't worth his time to meet with me. And that was a valuable lesson. That's another,
Yes.
valuable lesson you learn from people along the way. And so I have found 4 seems to be the magic number. Past 4, that's people who are trying to get rid of you. But it was really, most people don't follow up. They'll say, did you follow up after the 1 email? No. Well, why not? Follow up and show up.
I have to say that I've taken so much from this conversation. I mean, your love of your craft and your overall mission just comes through in spades. I knew that already from having watched you and listened to you in my preparation for today, but it comes through already. There's a learning from everyone and anyone you can, which you've demonstrated. There's sweating the small details when it's necessary, and being really disciplined and methodical throughout the way, and that smart what I would call portfolio and pipeline management to keep the successes going. I think that's super, super smart. Where can people find out more about you and your organization, Janice? Tell us where online.
I can find 3 places. Hearingaccess.com is my consulting company. JaniceLintz.com is my advocacy. And then, of course, LinkedIn under Janice Lintz. And please feel free to reach out to me.
Fantastic. And the great thing, as a Brit, there was one, I think, in your taxi example, I think that was one of the examples where you actually took some practice from the UK and brought it back to the US, which, given the beating the UK has had over the last year, I won't go into politics here, although I probably should. It's refreshing to have a positive example. But I'm very grateful for your time, your candor, your energy, and everything you are, Janice. So thank you. And this was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. If you've enjoyed the conversation, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel and to the podcast, and where you can get alerted to more content. And please check out the other interviews in the series. Janice, thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much.